Good afternoon, Colorado, the Rocky Mountain Mile High region. What is up? Boy, Dalton Reimer's going to be gone, huh? Sure does seem that way. Scouting Combine underway. It's 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time. That means it is time for Orange and Blue today. That means it's me, Cecil Lammey, and of course, Andrew Mason on assignment in Indianapolis. So we'll see if Mace is able to jump on board the show today. But good day, good afternoon, and welcome everyone into the program. And it's a program that we actually have more things to talk about. And it's not like the offseason gets slow until July, which is called time off. But during this time in the Scouting Combine, this is the last time that if the truth is to be told by those in power, those in command of these NFL teams, if the truth is going to be told, it's going to be told now at the Scouting Combine. After this, you get into the month of lies, which I know is usually April. There's going to be some pro day stuff floating around. It depends on who you listen to, though. Because remember, agents run the news cycle in the NFL for the most part because they have clients and they have jobs, and their job is to make their client look better. And to make their client look better, they'll tell you the sky's purple or pink or whatever. Like, they'll lie to you basically about their clients. So you need to be very discerning with where you get your information from. Right now, the information is coming from the coaches and the GMs, the prospects themselves that will be speaking at the Scouting Combine coming up later this week as they go through the drills. But right now, today, it's about Sean Payton. Today, it's about George Payton making their presence felt early morning, first up, and back-to-back even. Back-to-back, going from Sean Payton to George Payton. And everyone's wondering about the takeaways from this. The takeaways from this are pretty standard for what we'd already expect. It's always good to hear Sean Payton talk and proselytize about the Denver Broncos. That's awesome. He didn't really tell us much that we couldn't have already guessed or known. The two things that stand out to me is that Draymond Jones is a priority for this team. Good. He should be. Draymond Jones must be a priority for the Denver Broncos. You don't get a lot of players like Draymond Jones in the NFL, period. His skill set is somewhat rare. You know, that defensive lineman who can be disruptive, who can move all over. He can stand up. He, doesn't have as much success when he does that. But that's something that we already knew that going into this. So we didn't really need to hear that, but it's always good to hear those confirmations. I'll get back to more of my thoughts on what I thought from Sean Payton and George Payton today, but Andrew Mason was there bright and early in Indianapolis. Mace, good afternoon, buddy. And this morning, the Broncos kind of kicked things off there in Indianapolis.
Yeah, it was interesting how Payton led off the show. 10 a.m. and 10:15 a.m. Indianapolis time. One thing that was different was usually in past years, we've gotten some off to the side stuff with the coach and the GM after their press conference. We didn't have that today. And actually, for Sean Payton talking at the Combine, it's significant. He has not had a Combine press conference since 2009.
Wow.
It's like he won a Super Bowl and he decided that was it. Not doing this anymore.
Wow. I would have never guessed it had been that long.
February of 2009. I looked it up. So
wow.
I actually went back because I saw the transcript and I just went and looked at some reports just to make sure. Yeah, it was that was his last Combine press conference. He hasn't done it since then. So I think it was probably a little bit of a Herculean effort on the part of Patrick Smythe and the Broncos PR staff to get Sean Payton to even do that. But when he got up there, he didn't want to stop going. I thought like one of the interesting things, and I'm writing a column about the vibe of Sean Payton.
Yes.
First of all, an NFL PR staffer, Zach Gilbert, who worked for the Browns for a long time, and I believe also spent some time up at CSU. Ordinarily, he's like, 2 more questions, and he does his thing. He's like, 2 more questions, and Payton like waves him off like, no, we're going to keep going. Sean Payton went for 24 minutes. He had a 15-minute allotment. He went for 24. And I think the only reason he didn't go longer was because he started early. And that's another thing. after being on Hackett time last year.
Right.
Sean Payton started his press conference 8 minutes early today. So he got done. Basically, if he didn't have George Payton right behind him scheduled for 12:15, I think Sean Payton would have kept going. I think he would have kept going and going. But basically, I think one thing about today was effectively this was the new coach press conference, because a decent amount of the press conference dealt with the composition of the coaching staff, kind of the who and the why.
Right.
Why it ended up being Vance Joseph. We learned that Matt Patricia could be in line for a senior advisor role on the defensive side. Perhaps he's going to meet with Sean Payton again in Indianapolis here this week. We learned more about Vic Fangio really being Sean Payton's first choice and going to Miami instead. Learned why he kept Marcus Dixon and Christian Parker around. If you look around the position coaches, they were the only two that kept their jobs. And it was interesting to talk. Sean Payton talked about people around the building thinking highly of them, which also I think tells you that George Payton himself had some impact on the composition of this staff.
Yeah, which is somewhat remarkable, but you heard from George Payton and Sean Payton today. I started off the show with okay, they didn't really tell us anything we couldn't have already guessed. Draymond Jones is really important, and Dalton Reisner's probably gone. Those are the two big takeaways for me. You were there.
Yeah.
What do you think of the 24+ minutes ramblings of Sean Payton?
Yeah, and I think some of that with talking with those guys also kind of goes into what George Payton said as well. But yeah, they'd like to get Draymond Jones back. Every indication I've gotten though is that there is a price point in terms of average per year that they won't go past. There's a line in the sand. There does not appear in any way they're going to franchise him. And yeah, that means they wouldn't do a tag and trade on Draymond Jones, because if you do a tag and trade, he counts against your cap, and they want to be active in free agency. Offensive line is the number one priority, and I think it was telling that Dalton Reisner was not mentioned. Mm-hmm. We heard about Draymond Jones. We heard George Payton say how much he loved Alex Singleton and wanted him back. Didn't hear anything about Dalton Reisner. And I would say right now he looks like he's on the outside looking in. But we did hear how big a priority offensive line is, and that's where I expect the biggest expenditure in free agency is going to be on offensive line.
Yeah, I'm going through free agencies now, denversports.com, and I did centers yesterday. Guards was just posted today. I'm writing tackles as we speak. Well, maybe not as we speak. After we're done speaking, I'll finish up my tackle piece.
You took a break from writing tackles to do this show.
Yes, I did.
I took a break. I actually walked over here. What I'm going to do right after this is go back to, I've got two more pieces left from today, one on the coaching staff and one on kind of the vibe that I alluded to earlier of things being a little bit different. But yeah, you and I take breaks from writing to do this show.
Right.
Generally speaking, like if we're in the middle of something, usually we're in the middle of writing.
Well, and the thing is like with the offensive line, I feel such a huge responsibility because we got to look everywhere. You got to look everywhere. It's not just the big names, get Jawan Taylor or Mike McGlinchey or whatever. No, you got to search high and low. You got to figure it out because you're not going to have the draft to back you up at that position, right tackle specifically.
Right.
Maybe some interior guys later or whatever. But no, it's incredibly important for what Sean Payton wants to do.
And especially look, running back's also a priority, and they mentioned that as well today.
Yep.
But here's the thing. You don't pick until the third round. So when you're in the third round, you can find an immediate starter at running back. You can probably find that in the fourth round as well.
Yeah, Alvin Kamara was a third-round pick.
Right. So if you're looking for somebody who can step in and start right away until Javonte Williams gets all the way back, because you don't want to go in thinking, all right, it's Javonte or bust. You need somebody else. And even if he does get close to all the way back, you're going to want to relieve him with somebody else in the mix. So your chances of finding an immediate starter at running back in round 3 or round 4 are excellent. Your chances of finding an immediate and not only immediate starter, an immediate quality starter. I want to put that in as a key part of it. Your chances of finding an immediate quality starter on the offensive line in round 3 are much lower. I mean, for example, Lloyd Cushenberry started right away as a third-round pick at center. One would, with all respect to Lloyd, one would probably not call his first season quality.
Right.
And there are some that would argue that it hasn't even gotten to quality since then. And the fact that we're talking about offensive line right now probably tells you, sort of where Lloyd Cushenberry stands, where a lot of players stand. I think the only thing we really know right now is that when Garrett Bowles gets healthy, he's going to be back at left tackle. I don't think we know really much beyond that. Not even for someone like Quinn Miners, who I believe probably has the best chance of returning to his starting spot of any offensive lineman not named Bowles, but I don't think it's guaranteed.
Yeah, and I know that some people might be shocked, like, why would you spend money at center? Because if you could get Garrett Bradbury, the Vikings want to keep him, but they're $20 million over the cap.
Yeah.
So it's like, I wanted them to draft Bradbury. You probably did too, Mace. And that's when they moved from 10 to 20, and they got Noah Fant. And Bradbury went at like 18 or whatever. So yeah,
although I like Fant, I'll own up to liking Noah Fant a lot.
There's nothing wrong.
I was
with
pleased
Noah
with
Fant.
how that draft went, but yeah, it was Fant and Bradbury for me. Were kind of like the two guys that I was keyed in on when you got to 20. And
yeah, I wanted one of the Devons, but I'm glad.
Once they traded down, once they traded out at 10,
gone.
You weren't getting yourself a Devon.
And at 10, you weren't getting Devin White. Like, you can get Devin Lloyd. You're not getting Devin White. So either way, like, you can make it right. Like, if you have the right salary cap gymnastics, you could get, let's say, Juwan Taylor and Garrett Bradbury. I mean, if you did that, that would be significant and outstanding.
Formative. I mean, the pipe dream that I had until about a week and a half ago was that the Saints weren't going to be able to get Ryan Ramczyk restructured right, and then you could trade for him. But they were going to find a way with Ryan Ramczyk because he's been that good over the years. They're not stupid,
right?
So that's what I was hoping. But yeah, it's going to be a multi-pronged solution on the offensive line because you've got multiple holes to fill. But the thing is, there's another thing on offensive line, and it's this: sometimes it really takes a while for the offensive lineman to develop. I actually think that's a position where you're better off investing in second contract players that you've developed, or maybe you pluck from somebody else, because that's where you're really getting into the prime. Whereas running back, you can have your prime is often years 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So don't go spending big money on running back. Spend on the offensive line and get some guys going into their prime years. I mean, sometimes look, and then get the right players as well. Okay.
Yes.
Don't get somebody like Jawan James who misses at least 2/3 of the season every other year, who has a lengthy injury history. Don't do that. I mean, look, Graham Glasgow was working out just fine until he had that ankle injury.
Right.
Yeah. And he a second contract guy. He wasn't an all-pro, but you didn't worry about Graham Glasgow until he got hurt.
No.
And unfortunately, he wasn't the same guy when he came back, because a fractured ankle is a really difficult injury to come back from, especially on the offensive line. We saw it with Chris Cooper back in the day. So the fact that Glasgow made it on the field and was playing last year was actually pretty remarkable. But because of injuries, they had to ask more than I think he could deliver.
Yeah, it was a significant injury, and Glasgow did his best. So you give him an A for effort there for sure. And the running back thing to me, and I was on coffee break right after you, and man, we got to fix that exo problem. But anyway, like
you got it too.
Yeah. They kind of work around it. But anyway, like they did ask me, like, why sell me on running back? And I was like, yeah, you've got to run the ball. Like, you've got to run the ball. With Russell Wilson to play vintage Russ, you've got to run the ball. You've got to set up play action passing. You need to be at least balanced, if not run heavy in your offensive scheme. It may not be what Sean Payton wants to do yet, but as we've seen with Sean Payton, he'll do what works, right? Oh, we got Andy Dalton. It will make it work. We got Jameis Winston. We'll make it work. We got Taysom Hill. We'll make it work. Like, he just made it work. And what he did with Winston, I think, was significant. And then going 7-2 with Taysom Hill as his quarterback, like, he will do what works. And damn it, in order for this to work, they're going to have to run the ball.
One of the gifts of Sean Payton is that he's a problem solver. And he also has the John Foxian ability of masking deficiencies very well. And I think it's very symbolic that both John Fox and Sean Payton worked together on that Jim Fossil staff with the Giants that went to the Super Bowl back in the 2000 season. A Giants team that had no business being NFC champions.
No.
I mean, that was Kerry Collins It was I mean, their best player was Tiki Barber. It was basically Tiki Barber and a bunch of dudes on the offensive side.
Yeah.
And yet they had some magnificent offensive performances that season. But the two of them, for whatever reason, coming from off of that Jim Fossil staff helps you become a good problem solver. Yeah, and also helps you become somebody who you'll do whatever it takes. You're not married to a particular tactic or style. What you're married to is trying to find success. You mentioned the Saints, 2021. They fell short of the playoffs at 9-8, but I thought that was a remarkable job by Sean Payton. It was Jameis Winston. If Jameis Winston doesn't get injured, they're a playoff team.
Yes.
Make that clear.
Coming off of 30 for 30, everybody's making fun of him. Jameis Winston was really good and really efficient.
He was. He was terrific. And they look early that season. They looked like they were gonna win 11 or 12 games that year and go to the playoffs, like not miss a beat. And then he got hurt, and then you're basically patching and spackling things. You know, they had Trevor Siemian in there for a little bit, remember, and still somehow came home with a winning record that I don't think a lot of people expect them to have, and had a chance at the playoffs until the final day. And that's the sort of thing you get from Sean Payton. I'll say this. The type of season that you had last year where the bottom fell out and you went 5-12, that's not happening with Sean Payton. A bottom falling out season with Sean Payton probably still results in 7 or 8 wins. And we saw that in New Orleans. Their floor was 7-9 when they had no defense whatsoever and they were still competitive. And I think that's the thing. I don't think you're going to look up and see that the Broncos lost 11 or 12 games with Sean Payton. It might not be where you want it to be, but your floor is higher. And the theory on having a higher floor is that if you have a higher floor, it's a little easier to get to the ceiling because you're operating from an elevated level compared to other teams with lower floors. That's part of what you get with Sean Payton.
Yeah, and we see it. Let's take, for example, with Minnesota last year, Mace. Like, how many one-score games were they? They were undefeated in one-score games, I believe.
Until the playoffs, right?
Until the playoffs, right. So, like, they reached their ceiling, but it's because they had a high floor with Kevin O'Connell and that offense. Their defense was their Achilles heel. But, like, and I'm not saying the Broncos will get 12 wins or whatever, but, like, you get to that ceiling because you have a higher floor. And if you are in a one-win game, now you've got one-score game, you got an experienced coach that knows how to stay calm when those nerves are, on frayed edges.
And for all of Russell Wilson's flaws, you got an experienced quarterback. And that's why if you can get him back and get the confidence back and make sure that 2022 was just a dip and not a decline. If you can do that, you can do some good things. You can do some special things.
What was the cars and the no mirrors thing? Like, what was that? Like, gonna get a car and then take all the mirrors off because we're not looking back, baby.
That was his thing. It was like not looking back. I think I kind of got that sense that this press conference was the last time he really wanted to look back at 2022 and talk about it. Which means I'll be fascinated to see if somebody brings it up a month from now at the league meetings, because that's probably the next time we're going to hear from Sean Payton is at the coaches' breakfast down in Phoenix at the owners' meeting. And I think if you have some national reporter that walks up to the table and asks Sean Payton about last year, I don't think he's going to be very receptive. I think he said he didn't do a deep dive, not scuba, but kind of with a snorkel in last year. And I think he is ready to just charge forward.
And that comment, Mace, has drawn some ire from some. To me, it makes perfect sense because, like, they sucked last year. Okay. So why do you want to wade through that? Like, you want to get some beats from it, right? You want to take a look at it.
Know what your challenge is.
Yes.
That's the thing.
He gets mired in last season.
Yeah.
He's going to, it could corrupt his thinking or whatever. Like, look at it. Don't dwell on it.
Right. That's the thing. You don't want to do Nathaniel Hackett, which is to ignore the past that you weren't a part of, and not make a big deal about Kansas City having the winning streak in this series. Hackett went to like a level that you shouldn't go to. I think with Sean Payton, it's take what matters from the past. One of the things that does matter is, yes, the losing streak, because it can be powerful, because it can be a source of motivation to help you. So that's the kind of thing you want to take. What you don't want to take is the reasons why you lost last year. You want to avoid them, but you don't want to find yourself falling into that trap. And it's going to be important for this team to build confidence. And I don't think they build confidence by just repeatedly wading into the past. I think they build confidence by charging forward. And that's another thing to kind of talk about with free agency is that, with all respect to a lot of these Broncos who are UFAs, they were part of something that really didn't work out. And so because of that, can you find someone comparable to replace them that isn't connected to that, that crap storm of a season? Then
Right.
yeah, you might have two players who are equal and be like, well, I'd rather have the player who doesn't have, the participation or the taint from last season. And so,
Right.
but that doesn't mean you simply move on from everybody. You figure out which guys have value, and some of it is based on contractual decisions, and you're gonna have to bring some guys back. But you figure out which have value and you move on. But I would say also to some degree that you look at the last few years and say, okay, we're not really married to anybody here that doesn't have a contract that forces our hand, that we are open to moving on and going in a new direction.
Right. Right. Super quick, because I just want your reaction to this name. I want to see your face, Mace. Because then I got to go back to picking your brain about what's going on at the scouting combine. But the first guard that I suggested in my free agency report for guard, because we all love Dalton Reisner. But Isaac Seumalo from the Eagles, like, he didn't have a single game that was graded even as average.
Yeah.
Nobody on that line for the Eagles had a game that was rated as average. And you bring up the fact, like, now you're bringing in a guy that knows how to win.
Mm-hmm. He's top of my list too. And one thing to know about Sean Payton is he likes to build from the inside out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think any coach prioritizes the guard position more than Sean Payton. And it's a position that I think to most people is an afterthought, but he believes in inside out offensive construction. And that's where I think you're going to see a heavy investment in one of the guard spots, and maybe center as well, and then right tackle beyond that. I mean, I know I don't want to get too caught up in names, but I still think Mike McGlinchey should be a really good fit here when we bounce outside the tackle. But Seumalo, man, I mean, when I saw your article, I'm like, yeah, that's. I might as well. You and I could have written basically the same story, because he's top of my list too.
Right. It'd be a wonderful addition, and no wonder Sean Payton's such good friends with Mark Schlereth, because he loves guards, right? He understands. Hey,
but look at
language.
New Orleans. It's interesting. Look at how many Pro Bowl offensive linemen New Orleans had, and how many they had on the interior. I mean, it's incredible. Like, you go for the most part over the last 15 years, New Orleans had the best interior offensive line over the long haul in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
They really did. And that's it all started there. And I think he's going to start at those interior three spots when he's trying to get this thing built.
Andrew Mason live at the scouting combine. And Mace, I want a taste of your vibe piece, and the vibe around Sean Payton, which has to be so positive, but I also want the national vibe, because one thing, the scouting combine is very good for information and information trading and just kind of how people feel about your team.
Yeah.
So what is the vibe around the Broncos when you run into our friends across the league that work at other, for other teams or work at other outlets across the nation, and they say, holy cow, Sean Payton, or they're like, oh God, you're like, what is the vibe around Payton? And what is the vibe around just the Broncos in general now?
I mean, I'll tell you what. The vibe around Sean Payton, it depends. If you're viewing it from like a football performance, it's a positive vibe, right? If you're viewing it from like that, it might be pretty tough sledding for those who are either in team media or are in independent media covering teams. There was some of that vibe that they're gonna win, but it's not gonna be easy with that dude. I had a couple of conversations today that were very much like, oh man. Like, I had a friend a few weeks ago who said, "Hey, have you written something bad and he's got you running wind sprints yet?" I'm like, "No, not yet. I mean, we'll see." It's,
Right.
the time is young in covering Sean Payton here. So yeah, there's some of that. There's some of that sense going on, especially having covered the NFC South before, and having some chats. It's that they're going to be a better team, but for those in the media, it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be different. Look, Sean Payton was a guy who, at one point, had his coordinators doing their weekly availability via speakerphone, even though they were in the building. And this was not in the time of COVID. This was just kind of screw with everybody, right? There
Yeah.
have been some battles with the PFWA and Sean Payton over things like that. So this is sort of an inside baseball type of thing, but I mean, from a media perspective, it's going to be, there will be some times where he's going to drive us all absolutely bonkers, but that's not what most of y'all watching this care about. You care about what he's going to do. He's going to make everyone's like, he's going to make them better. Now, as for like the Broncos talent level, I'll say this. The talent level of the team overall, maybe Broncos fans have a higher estimate of it than people outside do. I'll say that. I think in Broncos country, there may be an overestimation of talent on the roster. The view I'd say from outside is, that there are some pieces, but it's not like you're married to anybody at this point,
Right.
except Russell Wilson because of the contract.
And you shouldn't be, because you haven't won. Like,
I mean, we got to keep it real here. I mean, not that we don't respect the players on the team as people
certainly.
we do,
Yeah.
but I'd say the roster overall, it's not regarded as one where like you're saying, man, you guys are swimming in talent. No, don't get that.
And that's
at all.
why there is that line in the sand, back to the Draymond Jones thing.
Mhm.
Like, there's a line in the sand because the market, there's a ceiling for everybody. And
Yeah.
Draymond Jones' market will be maybe a little bit lower than he anticipates, not necessarily because of him or his potential or his upside. The results with this team haven't been good.
Even though I'd argue he probably deserves a Jonathan Allen-like contract that's maybe a couple of years down the line, which is why I keep coming back to 17 million, because Allen was in the 14 million per range a couple of years back. You've had the cap go up, you had, inflation, whatever.
Yeah.
So to me, 17 million makes sense because you're getting a player who actually has comparable 4-year production to what Jonathan Allen had in Washington. But we'll see. I worry about losing Draymond because there isn't a replacement on the market right now. You will be sacrificing something, and you're sacrificing something from an area you may not be able to sacrifice from because you need that interior pass rush, because you can't rely on Randy Gregory being healthy at this point, right? I mean, it'd be great. I'd love to see Randy play all 17 games next year. Awesome. Sign me up for it, but he hasn't proven he can do that.
He'd push for 15 plus sacks. If he played 17 games, we're talking about the sack leader of the NFL. He just doesn't do that.
Yeah, the dude's a baller when he's healthy, but we only saw the glimpses of that last year. The glimpses early in the season were great, but that was it. And so because of that, you need to make up for that with interior push. It's not that I don't have confidence in Baron Browning, but he's still developing. With Baron Browning, you're talking about what might be. Draymond Jones is a proven, well above average, probably top 10, top 15 interior pass rusher in the league among the interior players, probably the top 10, top 15. So maybe not all pro, but he's really good and better than you're going to be able to find on the market in all likelihood, because unfortunately, I like Matt Henningsen and Eni Iwazurike as rotational pieces, and I'm really curious to see what Eni can do over the long haul, because he's got some significant athleticism to him. And I think for both of them, it helps that Marcus Dixon's staying around as D-line coach. But I also don't think Iwazurike is ready to make that leap anywhere close to that. And I think Henningsen is that guy that, if you've got 3 defensive linemen, he's kind of the guy that kind of cleans up if you've got a stud somewhere else, and he takes advantage of what's there. In other words, you take Draymond Jones out of that equation, I think you're going to be asking probably too much of those guys, along with DJ Jones. You need Draymond Jones back.
He is Andrew Mason. Speaking of cleaning up, Mace, you got to clean up and get back to your work in Indianapolis. Final thoughts from the day one of the scouting combine.
Well, there was one other thing I got to mention, and I know people, this sort of goes against Sean Payton's thing of not looking back, but the Russell Wilson thing with the Athletic, it did come up to John Schneider and Pete Carroll of the Seahawks today. And I think John Schneider took the very diplomatic approach by saying it was water under the bridge. I'll give them both credit for being the bigger person and being diplomatic at that stuff being brought up. They basically, they didn't confirm it, but they didn't deny it either in terms of what went on with Russell Wilson. Again, that's something that I don't know that a lot of Broncos fans are going to want to hear, but it is what it is, right? And it's part of the image rebuilding that Russell Wilson's going to have to do. He doesn't just have to rebuild his play; he's got to rebuild his image as well.
That's why he's posting pictures on Instagram with him without a shirt on. So, see, I don't have a dad bod anymore. So
doesn't that usually set in after the trip to Cannes, the trip around the world? You have some, you have some gourmet meals. Maybe you're going up to Napa Valley and having dinner at the French Laundry and doing some wine tastings and stuff like that. That's usually when it happens.
February, you're fine, baby. We want to see that in June, right? Yes. July. That's the thing.
Although there is something to the theory that Russ uses camp to get in shape, and Camp Hackett with its copious jog through days didn't necessarily provide that. So
you're right. Yeah, right.
Interesting.
You know what triggers me unnecessarily, Mace?
What?
Those t-shirt commercials where it's like, cover up your dad bod with this t-shirt that fits better. I'm like, how about you just get in shape? Like, sorry. Like, I was that guy, right? That was looking for the t-shirt. And I understand, like, some shirts fit better than others. But every time I see one of those t-shirts and it's like guy's raising his arm and you see his gut, I'm like, just lose the gut, buddy. Hey, you don't have to worry about the t-shirt.
Speaking as a long, unsuccessful gut loser, I kind of resent what you're saying there. I'm looking for whatever can kind of mask deficiencies to come back to that term. Oh, one more thing before we go.
Yes.
Sean Payton did take a little bit of a shot at the media because he mentioned that none of us were writing stories about the second floor office like early in the season or the preseason. So, well, we didn't know where the office was at the time, right?
I mean,
look, if I were the Broncos, I'd take Russ's office and put it in. I think the media room should go back to being the media room and not the game room. But if they're not going to put the media back in there, get the games out and get Russ's office in there on the ground floor so he can be around the corner from the locker room.
It'd be perfect.
On the player's floor. That's the thing. It's big. Look, it's a big deal. Sorry, it is.
Yeah, it is. And if you're saying it's not, well, I'll leave my comments for later. Offline comments. Anyway, he's Andrew Mason. Mace, thank you very much for jumping on board from the combine. It's a whirlwind. It's the first day, so I don't want to overburden you in one day. I got so many questions, but that's why we have the week of the show. It is orange and blue today. He is Andrew Mason. Follow him on Twitter at Mace Denver. I am at Cecil Lammey. Until next time, be safe, be kind, know that you are appreciated. Stay tuned, and as always, stay frosty.